Our next guest, his name is Andrew Panna QC, which stands for Queen's Counsel. He's president of the Hellenic Australian Lawyers Association, and we say good morning to him now. Kalimera, Andrew.
Kalimera, sis.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. A couple of things we're going to be talking about. We might start with the advent, or the creation, if you like, of the Hellenic Australian Lawyers Association. How many lawyers have you managed to uncover so far in your creation process?
Well, what's really been an eye-opener for myself and others who began the association, we launched the association in April 2014 in Melbourne. At that time, we really were not aware just how extensively Hellenic Australian lawyers are in the legal profession, in the Australian community generally. And when we started looking into it, we discovered in Melbourne alone, we've got hundreds of Hellenic Australian lawyers. And they're in every part of our community. They are in major firms. They are, as we know, in smaller firms, as you would have seen the smaller firms around the city. But they're also in government. They are in private practice. They are in in-house lawyers. And it was just an eye-opener for us to see just how well the Hellenic roots have established themselves in our community. And it's just a remarkable thing. Within 3 generations, and we're talking about 1950s, 1960s, when the first Greeks came and established themselves as lawyers. Within the 3rd generation, we can say that we are an intrinsic part of the Australian legal community. And it's just a remarkable event that has gone almost unnoticed, unspoken of, although those of us who are in the profession know of other Greek lawyers or Hellenic lawyers. What I didn't know is just how extensively we are represented in the legal community.
And it's really at the highest levels as well. Sorry, Alex, but we're talking about the highest levels
Absolutely.
of the legal
We
community.
have the Chief Justice of South Australia, Chief Justice Chris Kourakis. In Victoria, we've got now an appeal judge, Justice Emilius Cairo, who everybody seems to know in Victoria. In Queensland, we have Justice Antti Philippidis, who's now on the Court of Appeal. And in the federal court, we have Justice Melissa Perry. We have others, but they're just some of the ones we have. We can identify immediately.
Have you got their phone numbers handy in case any of our audience might have any problems?
Certainly, yes, of course, you can call a Chief Justice anytime you'd like. Just ring up. But the thing that's been a pleasure for myself and others who established the association is just how well it's been received. We have, as I said earlier, the Chief Justice of South Australia, Chief Justice Kourakis, is the national patron of the association. And in South Australia, and also in South Australia, in the Northern Territory, we had the then Chief Justice of the Northern Territory as our patron. He's just retired recently. In Western Australia, we have Chief Justice Wayne Martin, who's the patron of the Western Australian chapter.
Do you call him is he Greek or a Philhellene?
He's a Philhellene.
Right.
We have a great tradition of Philhellenes. We also have a great deal of goodwill from the Philhellenes.
Right.
And Greece has been trading on its goodwill for quite some time, of course. And
Indeed.
Some say we're running out of goodwill, but I don't think so.
But we still have some beautiful islands.
We do. We haven't sold those yet, but look, we might need to.
Yeah, exactly right. So how many legal professionals, if you like, have you managed to sign up to your association?
Look, I think we're about getting towards 400 or thereabouts. I don't know the exact figures, the Secretary would know, but that does not include New South Wales.
Right.
And on the 11th of November, we will launch a chapter of the association in New South Wales, and that will bring in the last of the states as part of our national association, and that's a substantial number of members there.
So why has New South Wales been the last to come on board?
Well, first of all, they already had an association called Alpha, and we thought it was not appropriate for us, when we're just starting out, to be launching into New South Wales. So we then gathered the rest of the states and left New South Wales to the end, and we then decided to launch into New South Wales.
Then you're gonna release the onslaught into New South Wales.
Well, you might say that. We've surrounded New South Wales perhaps strategically, and their association, it's a different association, but we will have our own association, and we will be the national association for Hellenic Australian lawyers.
So you have, a little bit later on, we're going to talk about an upcoming event that you have, but we thought we'd ask you a few more questions about yourself first. You have 2 letters after your name, Andrew Panna QC. What does QC mean?
It's Queen's Counsel, and it's an appointment made by warrant from Her Majesty the Queen. Mm-hmm. And the way you are appointed is you, as counsel, as a barrister, because you're involved in the courts in litigation and in the courts in particular, you apply to the Chief Justice for an appointment, and there's probably in any one year probably 100 or thereabouts, or possibly more barristers who apply. The Chief Justice then usually forms a panel of judges who will then consider the applicants and consider the merit, and it's an analysis of what work they do, where they do it, their competence, their qualifications, that is their ability to represent the legal profession at the highest level. And then from that group there is a recommendation made. It's usually reduced to about 15 or thereabouts in each 1 year, and that recommendation then goes to the government, and that goes to the governor, and then the governor, on Her Majesty's behalf, then issues the warrant to appoint someone as Queen's Counsel. And
do you ever get to meet the Queen?
No, I have not met Her Majesty, but one of our members, Meryl Veritimos, who's on the committee and has been a wonderful supporter of the association, has recently been appointed CB. Now, he will be going to meet Her Majesty, and perhaps I'll have a chat to him and say, look, can you just pass on our good wishes from the Hellenic Lawyers Association?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. So what do you think is a lot of Greeks and a lot of Greek people have gravitated towards the law? I know in my case, Andrew, it was either the law or the liquor shop. So my father said, you either become a lawyer or you're going to work with me in the liquor business. But what do you think has I suppose influenced a lot of people in becoming a lawyer? One influenced you, for example.
I think I was watching Perry Mason when I was very young, and that was 13 or 14 years old, and I thought that sounds good to me, and then I was just simply attracted to the idea of the law, and in particular practice in litigation, in the court system. I was never attracted to being a solicitor, which is important but a different part of legal practice. So I went, the shortest route possible, to the bar, and I've been practicing at the bar ever since. And I just find it a fascinating field. At times I say to people, it's a way of life. As a barrister, it's a way of life. It's not a job. You can't have a 9-to-5 job. You want a 9-to-5 job, you either become a solicitor, or maybe it works differently for Alex. He's got to work on weekends. But it's a way of life. And if you don't enjoy that way of life, then you shouldn't be at the bar.
So what is involved in that way of life? When you say it's a way of life, is it that you simply are thinking all the time, or you're always on call, or what is it that how did you find that way of life?
All right, let's just give you an example. There is no tomorrow. Tomorrow is the day. If you're going to be in court, tomorrow is the day. There is no other day. You have to be ready to appear and argue your case tomorrow. So whatever else you're doing, you have to put to one side. You either do it, that is, you take the matter on and you prepare yourself appropriately, and there's a lot of complications in our legal system, or you simply say, well, I don't want to practice that way. But you can't say, well, at 5 o'clock I'm going to go home, because there is no tomorrow, and tomorrow you're going to be in court. So you adjust your life according to the needs of the moment, which is the needs of the case. And my wife has complained to me over the years, and she's a solicitor, mind you, so she knows the system, saying that being a barrister is the worst possible job. She said, because she doesn't see me from time to time. And recently I was involved in a case, Mullet against Christine Nixon, and that was about 2 months of work. And when the trial was on, well, my family hardly saw me. You finish 11, 12 o'clock at night and get up the next morning, 6 o'clock, and you're back at
do
work.
It all again.
Do it all again. So that's why I say it's a way of life, because your whole life revolves around what you are doing at any one time. And that's why I said you have to enjoy that way of life.
Well, you would have to.
So, in terms of how you got to be a barrister, what study did you do? Was it? Don't you have a PhD as well?
No, I've got a Masters of Law from Cambridge.
Okay, fine.
I finished my degrees here, and then I decided I went straight to the bar.
Mm-hmm.
I finished my reading period. I had a very fine master, Gary Moorhead, who tolerated me in ways that are important for masters to tolerate their pupils. And then I went back, finished my studies I went to Cambridge University to study, and that's where I had my master's from Cambridge.
And what does it, for those of us who haven't thankfully spent a lot of time in the legal system, what does a barrister actually do?
Two things. Well, first of all, you've got court work, that is being in court arguing cases, and secondly, advice work, that is you're giving advice on various topics.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll get a brief from a solicitor asking you to advise on certain topics. And because law is just so vast, there are specialties within the profession. Mm. So some, for example, practice criminal law. Some will be personal injury. Some might be intellectual property, as Alex is involved in.
Yeah.
And these are whole specialised areas. But within intellectual property, you've got commercial law, for example. So you might have a property problem. Or there might be family law for those who practice in family law. Mm. And that's a different discipline. So for a barrister, you focus on a smaller range of issues, or rather areas of law, but you simply can't be on top of the whole gamut of the law.
Mm. Well, what does your average day look like? Are you in court every day, or some days? Or
No. Your actual days in court are limited. You might say for every one day you're in court, you're probably doing, say, 2 days of preparation,
right,
because people don't actually see how much preparation goes into the presentation of an argument. Quite often, you look at a topic or an issue, and 80% of what you've looked at, you say, not relevant, not relevant.
Yeah.
So you have a 20% core set of issues that you need to contend with. And when people see you in court, they say, oh, but this fellow is only here for 3 hours or 4 hours or 2 hours, and he's charging this amount of money.
Yeah.
Well, they actually don't see that to actually refine it to that period of 2 or 3 hours, you've actually spent maybe a day or 2 days of analysis of the legal issues. So they don't really appreciate why lawyers charge the amount that they do. And the same thing with solicitors. I mean, they may present 2-page letter or advice, but it takes quite a while to actually get to that refined state.
Yeah.
And that's the part which the public never sees. I have in the past tried to teach clients things like why it takes a long time. I've said to them, rather than talking to me, go away, sit down and write out what you say are the facts, the relevant facts. Most people cannot do that. In fact, not so most, nearly, the exceptions are those who can do it, because they cannot sit down and logically think through the issues.
Yeah.
When the ones who start doing it, they say, oh, it's taken me hours. And I feel like saying, welcome to my world.
Yeah. Well, most of us wouldn't spend much more time constructing an argument outside of a high school or a university essay. Really, that's as complex as we ever get, and yet the complexity of what you're putting together not only takes into account what's happened in the real world, but it also takes into account the law and what the law says. And
yes.
That's incredibly complex.
Well, you need to apply the law to the facts.
Yeah. And
no two set of facts are the same. So yes, you can begin with legal principle, but you need to apply the legal principle to the particulars of each matter. And there are always subtle changes or differences in the facts. So you need to always refine your argument to be appropriate to the issues that you're dealing with. And that just takes time. Stop, think, and then proceed with it.
And how did you settle on intellectual property as a specialty? What was the catalyst for that?
In the 1980s, Anton Pillar orders, there was a lot of pirating. And one of my instructing solicitors at that time, Julian Stevens, firm of Stevens Lawyers, were involved in doing a lot of intellectual property, in fact, and also tracking down pirates. And I had studied some intellectual property at university as well. and copyright law in particular. So that's the impetus that brought me into intellectual property. But back in the 80s, there were very few of us in the intellectual property field. Now it appears that everyone who comes to the bar apparently has some intellectual property background. I can't comment on that, but that just seemed to be everybody has it, whereas in the 80s, it was just so few of us.
Do you lunch as often as is rumoured?
No. The answer is lunches are a thing of the past.
Right.
Very few lunch the way that they're reputed to lunch.
Right.
The generation that had the time to lunch is almost all gone.
Right.
Which is those who preceded me, the giants that I saw as lawyers. But we just don't have the time anymore.
Is that disappointing?
I think it's just a way of life. You simply have adjusted to it, and we always seem to be pressed for time. And the law does not get any easier. It's sometimes I look at the law, and I said to my girls, my two daughters have just started law at Deakin University doing arts law, and I said to my girls, it's a bit like an onion. You've got to peel away the arguments, and as you're peeling the onion makes you cry, but you're going to have to keep on peeling it until you actually get to the core of the argument.
By which point you've got sore eyes.
You've got sore eyes.
Andrew, you have a pretty interesting function coming up with the association. Tell us a little bit about the event.
Yes, we have a function where we are going to argue the case for and against the return of the Parthenon Marbles. And it's been set up as two parts of the forum. One is going to be a moot court. By that, we'll have three judges. We'll have Justice Emilius Cairo, Justice Rita Zammit of the Supreme Court, and Justice Deborah Mortimer of the Federal Court,
right,
who will be the presiding judges. We'll have Paul Anastasia, who's the president of the Victorian Bar, and counsel for the United Kingdom will be Julian Burnside.
Right.
Well known.
The foreigner.
The foreigner.
Yeah.
And he's got the task of putting the case for the United Kingdom, which is to retain the marbles. And the topic itself raises a great deal of passion for both sides of the argument. And on one side, you have those who say the marbles should be returned to Greece, and others who say no, they were properly acquired by the British Museum and they should stay there. So we have this interesting debate. It raises a whole range of legal issues, strict legal issues, that is, how were they acquired, were they properly acquired? And it raises more difficult moral or ethical issues about where do artefacts of high cultural significance to be placed. And the issue about the marbles is really within the context of a much larger issue about cultural artefacts of cultural significance for a whole range of other cultures.
Yeah, and that word that the legal fraternity likes so much, precedent.
Precedent. Well, of course, it is as the world's looking at this issue and saying, well, if the British return the Parthenon marbles to the Greeks because they are pressured in some way to return it, and it may not be legal pressure because no one's taken on a case to the International Court in some way to argue that the marbles were in some way improperly removed from Greece. It's a difficult argument because, let's face it, Greece was not Greece as we know it at the time when the marbles were removed in about 1801 to 1805 or thereabouts, when Lord Elgin removed the marbles. And there's a basis for saying he had legal authority to do so, the authority being from the Sultan of the time, the authority of the time.
Yeah.
And therefore they were acquired legally, and England has acquired them legally. Some say that's not true. We don't actually have a copy of the actual order or the firmament, the permit. We have a translation of it. Yeah. So there's some opaqueness about it all. And put that in the context of the cultural artefacts of cultural heritage throughout the world. What about, apart from the Parthenon marbles, what about all the other artefacts that the museums of the world, the great museums of the world hold, whether it be the Louvre, whether it be the Museum of Berlin? What does one do with that? Countries entitled, the countries of today say, well, it's part of our cultural heritage, you should return them. That would effectively empty out the museums of the Western world. So there's that precedent issue that's troubling everybody. And the idea of the event was to throw light on both the legal and the non-legal issues. And on the legal issue, we'll have a moot court where both arguments will be put for the return and against the return. Then we will have a panel discussion, some eminent members of Monash University. There's Associate Professor Douglas Guilfoyle, who's an international law expert. There's Dr. Tria Guvas, legal philosopher. Dr. Andrew Connor, ancient historian. Dr. Evangelina Anagnostou Laotidis, a classicist. So we've got to cover both issues, which is the legal issue and also the non-legal issues, the moral and ethical issues about returning things generally, and in particular the Parthenon Marbles. And that's just a fantastic panel. We'll have a panel discussion about it.
So will there be a decision at the end of the day?
You have to wait and see.
Okay.
It might be reserved.
But before we say that, have we stacked the court in our favour? That's all I want to know.
No.
Well, I'd say Burnside is
judges,
formidable opposition.
The judges say they are open-minded to all of this, as all judges say when they begin a matter. We know that there are some issues that have been thought about carefully, let's put it this way, before we get there.
Yeah,
but it gives an opportunity for the Greek community in particular, not just the lawyers, because this really is an event for the Greek community, and we hope that those out there who are listening will say, yes, I'd like to go and hear the debate, because it actually puts some legal focus to the issues, and not just pure emotion. And the emotions are on both sides, mind you. Those who say you should return the marbles, and those who say no, that you shouldn't return them. There's a greater issue here. For example, this is part of cultural heritage of the world, not just the Greeks.
Yeah.
So the reason it's being held this year is because I think this marks the 200th year since the sale, the fateful sale of the marbles. I'm just looking at your website here, so
You are.
In that case, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but it's interesting. I mean, we can talk about I suppose the legal issues, but I suppose there's this other thing called politics, and to the extent to which politically there could be things that could be done in order to secure. I mean, for example, we have a situation where England has left the EU.
Yes.
Or will leave.
Well, I think it's
Has voted
pretty
to
much
leave.
a fait accompli. But anyway, yes,
Maybe.
point taken.
Different
Tom.
issue. Yeah.
Geez, he should have been a lawyer, this boy,
Yes.
Andrew. But I mean, there could be with the EU. I mean, just imagine the EU sort of banding together and having a go at merry old England. I think that'd be fantastic.
Well, I think they're looking for any opportunity at the moment, to be quite honest.
No, this could be it. Or you can have a new Greek Prime Minister, Dionysius Trumpopoulos or someone.
Yes,
who
good
could
idea.
who could say "ne" or "ohi" or whatever he wants to
build
say.
a wall.
Build, absolutely, and get the English to pay for it.
Yes, that's right. Andrew, Panna QC, question without notice. If you were to mount an argument against the restitution of the marbles, what path might you take? What are the arguments against?
Well, the arguments against, first of all, begin the legal argument. We say, they say Lord Elgin had authority from the then authority over the area, being the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan, to take the marbles. And he took them because he was a lover of classical Greece, and he took them because he said they're to be protected because it was being used. It's been the Parthenon has been used and abused for a long period of time, and it was used as a store of gunpowder at one time, and there was an explosion which damaged a substantial part of the Parthenon. So there's a legal argument that says he had authority to do so. He actually spent a great deal of money, and in today's something like £70,000. We're talking about early 1800s, which would go into many millions, to remove the marbles and take them and preserve them. And in fact, they have been preserved. And the British Museum has got a wonderful area where they're displayed in all in their glory. So they say, first of all, we had a right to do so, therefore, and Britain had a right to acquire them, and it did, and therefore they're in the right place. And they say it's not just Greek cultural heritage, this is part of the Western cultural heritage in particular, and it belongs to the whole world now. And therefore they should stay there. The argument about moving them back to Greece, they say, well, hang on a moment. You're going to move them from the British Museum, which has a specially built area to display them, into another museum. So we're not talking about bringing the marbles back and putting them back on the Parthenon. We're talking about movements from museum to museum. And why move them to Greece? They're beautifully displayed at the British Museum. Their access to the museum is free. People can come and look at the glory of classical Greece. And also they say, well, the Greeks of today are not the Greeks of the ancient Greeks, and therefore they had no greater right. I mean, there may be the inheritors, but they're not entitled to claim that part of their cultural heritage back to Greece.
Mm. But it isn't. I mean, you could argue that the Parthenon is actually a sacred site. It was a temple in aid of, or in order of Athena, the goddess Athena. And there are many people, who still believe in the 12 gods of Olympus and so forth. I mean, you could say
they were fun gods.
Yeah, they were great gods, and they all, loved each other and hated each other. But at the end of the day, it is a sacred site for Greece and for Greeks. I know every time I go to Athens, the first thing I do is park my bags at the hotel and go straight to the Acropolis.
But that's barely a legal argument, is it?
No, it's not.
That's an emotional one.
But out of emotional and I suppose faith issues, legal issues, can germinate.
Yeah.
I mean, the law arose from faith.
Well, of course, yeah.
From canon law. And
but Parthenon, of course, was used as a Christian church for a substantial period of time as well.
That just adds faith. That just adds weight to my argument.
Well, possibly, but. People also forget, we talk about the Ottoman Empire, but let's not forget that Greece was part of the Roman Empire for nearly 1,000 years before the Ottomans arrived. And people forget about that. So, yes, there was a territory which we identify as Greece, but Greece, as we know, was not the Greece of today.
It was not a sovereign state.
We're not a sovereign state. And therefore, the question is, well, who has a right to dispose of those things under which they have authority? So, the legal argument put forward by Britain is, well, obviously the Ottoman Empire had a right to dispose of those things over which they had authority. And the Greeks didn't have any authority, and they hadn't been around as Greeks. For more than 1,000 years before the Ottomans got there. We forget that Greece was part of the Roman Empire and what we now identify as the Byzantine Empire, but that came a bit later. So Greece has some difficulties arguing on a legal basis, but on a different basis, that is, cultural and emotional basis. Of course, it's a great argument. So, it's part of our culture, it's part of our heritage. We should have it back.
So, I asked you about the arguments against returning the marbles. If you were Greece and you were mounting an argument for the return of the marbles, what's the actual legal argument?
The legal argument is that the authority that was given to Lord Elgin to remove the marbles was not really an authority to remove anything. That's the argument being put, is an authority to remove. But we don't have the original authority, the permit, and the permit seemed to allow more an ability to study and possibly take away some loose bits, but not an authority to actually go and tear down the frieze and remove it. So legally, it may be said that he didn't have authority to do what he did. And therefore, what he sold ultimately to Britain was stolen goods. So Britain is the recipient of stolen goods, and so you return them to the place of origin. And that's one of the arguments being put.
Along with reparations for proceeds of crime?
Of course. Of course. The Greeks are great at seeking reparations from everybody.
Yes.
As we say, compensation.
Yeah, that's exactly right, compensation. Yes. Yeah, you guys would know all about that. So the event, when is it happening? On
the 19th of October, and it will be held at 55 Lonsdale Street, and it will start at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. We have drinks and canapes, and this is the fourth function that the Hellenic Australian Lawyers has organised jointly with Monash University, and true to our Greek tradition, we have drinks and food before we sit down and think about things.
Yes, exactly.
So after we have some food and some drinks, we'll then sit down and listen to, first of all, the legal argument to be presented, and then the ethical, moral argument about the return of the artefacts which are obviously great cultural significance to us as Greeks.
And sorry, what does it cost, and how do people get tickets?
The cost, you have $20 for students, $35 for members of the association, and $50 for all the others who are attending. If you want to book, go to the Hellenic Australian website, just call up Hellenic Australian Lawyers, it will take you to the website, and you'll be able to click on and try booking and book.
Yep.
And come. And I think those your listeners should make an effort to come, because this will throw light upon the debate. That's the whole point of the debate. That is, put some clarity of thought into what, in fact, is a very live issue, and it's an important cultural issue for all of us, and not just talk about in terms of pure emotion. And of course, there is an emotion element to it, but we're going to throw some light on it.
Well, I think also people should I mean we're sort of coming up to grand final season and so forth, or grand finals a couple of weeks away. Would you have any objection to people wearing sort of Greek scarves or I'm certainly going to bring my Greek scarf along, Hellas.
Not at all. No.
Can you barrack in a legal debate?
Well,
of course you can.
You will be able to participate at some stage as part of the audience, but yes, you as long as you don't barrack too loudly when the arguments are being put.
Okay.
Respect the legal arguments, of course, and then hiss. Now, when Julian Burnside gets up, when Julian Burnside gets up and he's got the unpopular, possibly, side of the debate, and he's going to argue that the marbles should be retained in Britain, you can hiss, I think.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
So. What about, is there a sort of a betting going for this? We're in this sort of betting culture now.
Have a market.
Well, what's the market out there? Is there?
I don't know, I'm afraid. It's beyond my legal...
50-50, wouldn't it?
There are perfectly good arguments for both arguments. That's the beauty about the debate.
Yeah.
And will there be Athenian democratic style voting where you put your rock in a barrel, or are we leaving it to the judges?
Just wait and see. But let's not forget that we Greeks were great at thinking through issues, reasoning. It's one of our great cultural traditions. So we say this is an event where people should sit and think and reason through the issues. Don't accept things. Don't simply accept whatever side of the argument, but listen to it, think it through.
Look, here's another suggestion. I don't know if you want to make the suggestion to Paul Anastasiou and Julian Burnside, but potentially, what about sort of Paul Anastasiou coming in, sort of presenting in a toga, and then you can have sort of Julian Burnside looking sort of dressed in some sort of James Cook type. I mean, it's just a suggestion, but.
I've got a better idea. I think Paul Anastasiou should really come dressed as Lord Byron.
Yes.
Yes.
And then Julian Burnside can come along dressed in wig and gown.
Yeah. What if he came as Lord Elgin?
Lord Elgin, that's right.
Yep.
Yeah,
come dressed. That is brilliant.
Sounds like a fantastic idea.
Between the three of us, we've covered all the.
You've covered all the bases, yes.
Excellent. Andrew Panna QC, President of the Hellenic Australian Lawyers Association. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.